Good evening. Good evening and welcome to our AIUW Forum for the 35th Assembly District. And you probably notice, we don't have both candidates here. So I'm going to tell you, AIUW tried very, very hard to get both candidates to come tonight. And we worked around a lot of dates, but it just never worked out. So I suggested to Assemblyman Cunningham that he could send a representative and they could read the answers to the questions that we sent ahead of time. And I tried to call them twice today and did not receive an answer, so I don't think they're coming. So I'm sorry about that we don't have both candidates, but you know what? We're going to have fun anyway, okay? Let's have fun, right. So what I want to first, because I always forget at the end, I want to thank the City of Lompoc for allowing us to have our forums here, and our new city manager is sitting right here. Thank you very much for doing that, because it's really nice to have. It's a nice building. This forum is going to be televised. And I just found out where the person sits. She's back here someplace, right, and she's watching us. But anyway, she's televising tonight, and so that's really easy. We used to have all of our meetings at the library, and the truck had to pull up, and they had to get all the cameras out and everything, and it was a lot of work. So this is really, really nice. So want to thank the City of Lompoc, and also TAP TV for taping this, because it will be shown live. So it's live streaming right now. And so for all those people that are at home that didn't come, welcome, so that are watching this. And then it will be shown later, too, on different times. And it'll be on the radio. So there's no excuse for not everybody in Lompoc to watch this forum. So we appreciate that. I'm going to tell you a little bit about AIUW. And that is that 17 members in 1881 decided they had college educations. And at that time, there weren't many that did, and they wanted to talk to some like-minded women. So they decided to form an organization. They didn't call it the American Association of University Women in the beginning, but later it became that name. We've been in Lompoc as a branch, an AIUW branch, since 1964. And when I've looked through all of the scrapbooks, which I still have in my garage, I found out that they started doing forums right away. So we've been doing forums in Lompoc for the city council and for the school board and for the assembly district and congressional districts. We've been doing it for over 50 years. Now, those same people, unfortunately, aren't with us today, that started it, but most of them aren't. But the rest of us are carrying on. And we're a nonpartisan group. We don't support candidates. We do support a lot of issues, though, and we work really hard supporting equity for women and girls. So we'll be out there pounding the pavement for those issues. You can count on it. So we do a lot of research. And we have a lot of material back here if you're interested in more about that. We also have information here if you aren't registered to vote yet. We want to be sure everybody is registered to vote, and you have until October 22nd. So if you've changed addresses, whatever, you need to re-register. And we do have information so you can do it online. And there will be a county elections office open also. And it will be here in Lompoc, and it's open about 29 days, I guess, before the election. So that'll be open too every day. So just be sure that you're registered to vote, and then remember to vote. Okay. So I'm just going to run through a few of some things about the format tonight, and then we'll get started. So each candidate has a 3-minute introductory statement. And the order I have on my notes here that the order is determined by drawing, but it was pretty easy tonight, actually. So we didn't have to do any drawing. So I'm going to ask a series of prepared questions for both candidates with no more than 3-minute answers. And then the questions I have this in my notes, the questions will be alternated, but that's not going to happen either tonight. So, but we will time everything. And guess what? There's no rebuttals tonight, okay? So then there's one final question that the candidate does not know about that I am going to ask. And one thing I'll ask is that there's no applause until the moderator asks for it. And be sure to silence your cell phone. I know nobody ever calls you at this time of night, but you know, tonight they might, right? So be sure to silence your cell phones. Okay, so everybody's reaching for that. And then at the break, we're going to have a break, and we did pass out cards, but if you think of a question, there it went. If you think of a question, write it on a card, and we'll collect them at the break, and then we'll ask as many of the audience questions as we can. And then we'll have a 2-minute closing statement from each candidate. So, Mr. Ostrander, welcome. Welcome to our forum. And we would like to have you begin with your 3-minute opening statement.
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. I think that the reason that we're here today is to try to move ourselves forward. This is very loud, isn't it? Would it be okay if I stood up?
It would be.
Because you guys can hear me from like this, right? All right. Huh? Does it work for TV? Yes, I can do that. So thank you all for coming. We're all here today because we believe that there's some things that need to be changed in our governance. And the fact that you step up instead of turning away makes you model citizens, in my opinion. I think it's a shame that we don't have an actual conversation between our actual representative. And I might point out that what you're seeing, from my opinion, is the making of a politician as opposed to somebody that cares about human issues. This is a calculation not to come. It's a calculation that the American Association of University Women and the people that might show up here won't really add to his vote total, and so we don't worry about you. In fact, yesterday when I was at the Tribune, we were doing an endorsement interview between Mr. Cunningham and myself. And the first question that we were asked was, what do you think the most important thing is in your district? And he was the first one to respond. And he said, closing of Diablo Canyon. Now, certainly that's a very significant issue. But it kind of leaves you guys out. It means that 1/3 of the district wasn't even addressed. And I don't know about you, but I feel that there are some issues in Lompoc and Santa Maria and Santa Barbara County that we share in San Luis Obispo County as well, like healthcare. All of your questions tonight, gun violence, agriculture, and immigration, are all things that we all have in common. And I thought it was a coincidence, an interesting coincidence, that yesterday SB 1090, a bill that our state senator, Bill Monning, who's not your state senator, but he's our state senator in San Luis Obispo, passed, that he wrote. It was accompanied by Mr. Cunningham in the Assembly, awarding San Luis Obispo County effectively about $350 million to retrain workers and $85 million to mitigate our taxes. And that's terrific. I mean, it's a good thing. But it left you out. And I think that's terrible. I think the one complaint that I hear when I come around Lompoc and Santa Maria is we never see him. And that's a calculation. So tonight, let's have just a friendly, informal conversation beyond these questions. And let's tell me what your issues are, and I'll talk to you about how I think we should solve them. And I hope I get 6 minutes to respond, not 3.
We'll have plenty of time.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming tonight.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now the questions, the 5 questions that I'm going to ask first, Mr. Ostrander has had time to prepare for those. So the first one is, AUW supports access to health care for all Californians. What is your position on funding for health care, especially women's reproductive health care, and how will you support your position?
Well, first of all, how many of you are aware of Bill SB 562? Most of you, some of you. SB 562 was a bill that came before the legislature this last year that was intending to create a single-payer healthcare system. Our Speaker of the Assembly, Mr. Rendon, decided that that bill wasn't fully written enough and it didn't have a good enough understanding or approach to financing, and so they tabled the bill so that it didn't go further. I understand Mr. Rendon's concern, but I was disappointed because the whole point of the legislature and legislator is deliberation, to figure these things out. So I personally am fully in support of single-payer health care. We know that Americans are spending over $11,000 a year on health care and getting about 37th in the world best outcome. We have a higher infant mortality rate and a shorter lifespan than most of the developing countries in the world today. Something's wrong with that. It means that we're spending so much more money for profit and for administration, and we should be spending more on actual health care. My opponent has a 0 score with Planned Parenthood. He's voted against bills that funded Planned Parenthood. I've used Planned Parenthood. I believe in Planned Parenthood. I believe in their mission, and I think there's a lot of people that support Planned Parenthood. So from my point of view, we need to do more work on creating a bill that's functional and appropriate and can get passed. It has challenges. It means that all of us are going to have to step up and pay probably a 2.3% sales tax and a 2.3% personal tax. It would exempt small businesses up to about $2 million. We already pay for almost 70% of our health care through public dollars. This is not a big reach. And don't believe these conservative arguments that it's all of a sudden we're going to spend $400 billion and dwarf the state budget. Essentially what we're proposing is a funding mechanism. Not all of a sudden people getting health care. Not all of a sudden changing our health care interest. But it will help to ensure 3 million more people and reduce our cost by about 10% a year.
Thank you. Okay. Next question. What is your position on gun violence, and how will you support this position in the State Assembly?
Well, I think some of you that I've seen out here were part of the March for Our Lives walk that we had here in Lompoc, and I was down here for that as well. I'm a farmer. I've been to Africa. I spent over a year, about a year and a half there in Africa. I've worked with lions, rhinos, cheetahs, and elephants. I've been in dangerous places in the earth. And in my own farm, certainly there are times when you are in jeopardy, but never, ever have I felt the need for an AK-47 or an AR-15 or a semi-automatic assault weapon. In my opinion, a lot of men are having an identity crisis today. And it's a vanity weapon. From my point of view, it's a vanity weapon. I'm not saying that people don't like to shoot. I get it. My father liked to shoot clay pigeons. We used to hunt as a kid. I don't like killing things anymore. I like to see it twice. But I get those people who feel that's an important bonding issue and a place to get out in nature. But what we have here is basically a fundamental agreement on about 99% of the issue on weapons, even with the NRA. How many of you realize that nunchucks are illegal? How about switchblades, swords, automatic weapons? We already get most of this. There's one issue. It's a semi-automatic assault weapon intended to kill human beings. Now, on the farm, many years ago, we had lots of accidents. Everybody I knew from around the area had some sort of accident because they weren't used to working with kind of dangerous equipment. And then we went back and we figured out we put shields on things, and we put automatic brakes on things, and we put rollover protection services on our tractors. And then the National Transportation Safety Board decided we need to make cars safer. We used to bury the ends of those guardrails. We made cars collapsible. We put in airbags. We put on seat belts. And guess what? Our death rate, mortality, or casualty rate went down. The same can be true of violence and of gun weapons, but we have been prevented from having those studies by the Dickey Amendment at the federal level, and here in California we haven't financed our own. But there is a gentleman who is now financing a study, and I support his study, and I want to see where the best places are that we can cut down violence and still live with our Second Amendment.
Okay, thank you. Okay, third question. Agriculture is the #1 industry in your district. What will you do to support agriculture in terms of water supplies? Many experts are concerned about safeguarding our groundwater due to the proposed expansion of oil production in Cat Canyon. How will you address the issue of having adequate farm workers to produce our crops?
All of those questions need about 3 minutes by themselves. So we're going to do the best we can, and then you can ask me later on for more specific questions. First of all, how many of you know that I'm a farmer? All right, okay, thank you. I've been put in my place. Thank you very much. I'm very familiar with these issues. I actually wrote a television show a few years ago called Information that helps people to understand our food systems and how we get that food and how we produce that food. The issue that I hear strongest has to do with water. And there's some science behind this, and I don't know that I have 3 minutes to explain it all, but essentially 80% of the water that we're using in our district is used by agriculture. Only 20% is domestically used. We have 2 programs at the state, one called the State Water Environmental Enhancement Project and the Healthy Soils Initiative. Both of those projects, or both of those programs, are only funded a small amount of money, maybe $25 million in the first year, and they were zeroed out in this year, and then they finally came up with about $12.5 million to help them. That has helped 80 farmers in our district with approximately $7 million to help teach them and to give them grants to use more water-efficient technologies, things like computer-aided sensing equipment so that we know when to water as opposed to just watering on a schedule, knowing when the plant needs it. There are a variety of other things that we need to do that actually have to do with climate change, or they have an additional value in climate change, but I don't think 3 minutes is going to give me enough chance to do that. But we have to rethink how we're tilling our soils. Every time we go through and we till our soils, we lose 1/3 to 3/4 of an inch of rainfall moisture out of those soils. We leave our soils bare, which means they heat up, which means that when and in addition to that, when you leave soils powdery, how many of you people have ever had a plate of flour and dropped water on it? You ever know what that's like? It actually compacts the flour and then kind of runs off. That's what happens to our soils as well. By using no-till equipment, by leaving plants and vegetative material between the rows of our grapes, by looking at our vegetable production and using some different methodologies where we leave soil or leave the soil covered, leave organic material on there, we would increase organic matter in the soil and save 16,000 gallons of water per acre. We need to start collecting this water as well, but we need to collect it in the way that nature intended, as opposed to building more dams and more water reservoirs. We have to do that at the domestic level as well. In my opinion, one of the things that we should do as a building code manner is make sure that people, when they're building new houses, create gray water collection systems. This is a lot of water that's basically going into our septic tanks or into our sewer systems and then gets flushed away. Of course, in San Luis Obispo, in North County, San Luis Obispo County, we have some water reclamation projects which are very helpful. Here in San Luis Obispo County and in Santa Maria County, we both have a concern about oil production. We have some of the dirtiest crude oil on the planet here. And the way you get that out is by injecting at a high pressure steam that uses lots and lots of water. And then when they're done with that water, they want to re-inject it back into the ground. And all of that injection process actually increases the risk of seismic events and increases the risk of polluting our water bodies. We can't afford that. Fossil fuels are an old technology. We're moving beyond that. And most of the money that comes from that oil does not stay here in the Central Coast. I could keep going if you let me.
We can come back to that.
Can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
Again, I just want to make one thing perfectly clear. I respect my opponent. I have no interest in dragging him through the mud. But it is required of me to make sure that you understand compare and contrast, because that's what you're going to have to make the decision on November 6th or sooner. In this particular case, we have a thing called Measure G in San Luis Obispo County. Have any of you heard of it? Measure G is an attempt to prevent all new oil well drilling in San Luis Obispo County because the Arroyo Grande oil fields, just like Cat Canyon, are applying for an exemption to the water aquifer so that they can drill 481 new wells. Now, this is a very simple thing. Most of us know whether or not we want to continue to invest in fossil fuel technologies, risk our groundwater, and risk additional seismic events for 73 jobs. And I think pretty much everybody agrees. I shouldn't say pretty much everybody, because there are a few people pushing back on it. But in our particular case, the person who's leading the No on Measure G campaign is my opponent's former communications director. In the interview yesterday with the Tribune, he refused to take a position on this issue. This is a really simple issue. You like it or you don't like it. He is employed by us to make decisions like this, but he's dodging this question because he knows that when we went out to try to create an initiative to put this on the ballot, and I helped gather signatures on that and created the video to explain people what that was about. 20,000 people signed that initiative. We only needed 8,000. There are only 3 people who are pushing back against Measure G. They've put in $750,000, and they are funding people at $16 an hour to be bussed up from LA to pretend that they're a grassroots organization in our area. They will do that with Cat Canyon as well. So you should understand the compare and contrast between the two of us on this issue. I think it's profound. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. What is your position on your party's platform policy on immigration? What policies would you promote to support that position?
You know, we have sanctuary status here in California, and I support that. And one of the things that I have seen, particularly in Lompoc and in Santa Maria, that has impressed me to no end. Then in Paso Robles, I have a friend here, we met years ago. When he worked in Paso Robles rented a building or part of a building that I had. And Paso Robles, the same thing. When I go out and I talk to people, the most impressive demographic to me is the first-generation immigrants. Those young people who are the same age as my kids, they're taking AP classes, they're doing community service, they're working to help support their families, and they have ambitions to be doctors and mechanical engineers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They are reinvigorating the American dream that all of us had a chance for. And in my mind, they're the most impressive group because they're hungry and they're striving and they want to be better. And we know that immigration has a net economic benefit to the rest of us. And we know that immigrants commit less crimes than do average citizens. This is a population that deserves an opportunity. It doesn't mean open borders. It means that we have a lot of DACA kids here that need an opportunity to become American citizens, who all they know is the American way of life. In some cases, they only know English. These people are valuable. Many of these people came from horrible situations. I have a friend who worked for me for 15 years. He's back in El Salvador now. He tells me, Bill, they'll kill me for my phone. We have a sign on the front of the Statue of Liberty that talks about giving us you're sick, you're tired, you're poor, you're huddled masses. And we've turned our back on that out of some horrible xenophobic idea that they're holding us back and bringing us down. To me, what I see going on at the federal level is no different than the internment of the Japanese, Kristallnacht in Germany, or the McCarthy-era stuff, or holding people down in 1965 before we gave them the Civil Rights Act. How many of you know that actually in the Deep South, during Jim Crow, one of the questions that was tendered to people who wanted to register to vote was, how many bubbles are there in a bar of soap? That is what we are facing today, in my estimation.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Do I get the mystery question now?
No, not yet, not yet. It's coming, though.
Okay.
It's coming. AUW advocates self-sufficiency for all women. What policies would you endorse and support to achieve pay equity and fairness in compensation and benefits? What policies would you promote to achieve equitable access and advancement in employment, including vigorous enforcement of employment and anti-discrimination statutes?
That's a good question. Again, there's more than 3 minutes of answer there, isn't there?
Of course, that's our way, right?
Well, let's start with the fact that for most men in this room who are secure and comfortable in their manhood, that we know that you women are doing the most work around the house, and you're bringing in a wage, and you're taking care of the kids. So, applause to you for that. One guy just got in trouble tonight. I can see that. It's a shame that even in California, as progressive as we are, that women are still only earning about 82 cents for every dollar that a man earns. It's a shame that we don't have a system in place where both parents actually have time off to help raise that child in the first 12 months of their life. It's a shame that we put women in a situation where they can only be with that child for 6 weeks, and then after that you're on your own. Because those first months of life are the most formative and the most bonding times of life. So why we can't see that as an investment, I have a hard time understanding. We also know that in European countries where they have done that, they have found more women in the workplace. They've seen more integration in families overall. And that actually is a boon for the economy because you have more people working, more revenue coming in, the workforce is more productive. So from my point of view, we still need to erase that pay gap. We need to have funding for parents to be able to spend time with their child in that first year of life. And we need to protect and sanctify those first few months of that child's life to make sure that they are secure and that a woman doesn't have to make the choice between going to work and leaving that child home with somebody as home care. My wife made that choice years ago, and I know that it made a difference for my sons.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we're ready for the secret question.
Should I write it down?
Oh, probably not. You don't probably have to do that, right?
Okay.
Right. Okay. The final question. In the past, the perception has been that the Lompoc area has not received much attention by our assembly person. Given that the 35th Assembly District runs from the Monterey County line in the north to Koyama in the east and south to Lompoc, how will you reach out to Lompoc? What do you see as the top 3 issues facing the Lompoc area, and what will you do to address these issues?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. First of all, I would like to say that there are a number of people in this room who I've become friends with as a result of being down here and campaigning, and I don't mean to end those friendships as soon as I get to Sacramento. It's the fact that, Elva here, who is with the UDW, is a very impressive person to me. I've talked to her about this. My mother died of vascular dementia, and in the last few years of her life, she wasn't able to reciprocate, but she still needed care. And people like Elva, who show me how important it is to be able to love one way, are very impressive people. I'm very moved by her. And Lorraine here, who works so hard in the Democratic Party, doing so much work. And Janet, of course, is always out on any different object, whether it's March for Our Lives or American University Women. And Wally in back there, and Michelle and Margaret, and all of these people here are actually become friends of mine. So from my point of view, I don't want to end these friendships in some insincere way just because I'm running for office. I think it's a shame that Mr. Cunningham doesn't get down here, and I think that it is a challenge for any person just to be mindful of the fact that it's a 150-mile-long district with 470,000 constituents. It's a very big district. It is hard to be in all places at all times. And you do want to have a personal life sometimes. So when you go to Sacramento and you're there on Monday through Thursday, on Friday, you got to make that 4.5, 5-hour drive home. It takes a lot of discipline and willpower to drive another hour to come south down here, but we have to do that. We have to make that opportunity. We have to open an office in Santa Barbara County. Whether that's best put in Lompoc or whether that's best put in Santa Maria, my intention would be to have a staffer here to listen to see what you people need, what we need, right? Because we're all in this. And as far as what is the most important issue in Lompoc, I think I'd have to ask you that question more than me give you the answer to that question, honestly. Because one thing that I've learned as I've gone across this district is it's a vast difference between the needs of Lompoc and Paso Robles, between San Luis Obispo and Santa Maria, between Cambria and Sisquoc and New Coyama. There's always differences between these places, and it's up to you to help me understand what those most important things are regionally. But overall, I believe that we all need health care. I think your questions are very appropriate tonight. Would everybody agree with me on that? We all need to have single-payer health care? I think we have to address the issues of agriculture and water, but we also have to address the issues of agriculture and chemicals. You know that 1 in 5 of jobs in Santa Maria are agriculture related, and they have the highest stomach cancer of just about any profession in California, probably, and probably the United States. And there's an interesting bill, I don't know how many of you will be upset with me or engage me on this, but there was a very interesting bill that was passed in Chile that is treating processed foods the way that we treated cigarettes in the late 70s and early 80s. Remember how we did that? We got rid of Tony the Tiger. We started labeling cigarettes as these are harmful to you. We stopped advertising on television when those receptive minds are so easily formed. And we stopped putting ads in newspapers, and we asked Hollywood, they didn't do a very good job of it, but we asked Hollywood to stop making it a cool thing to be smoking in every picture. And in Chile, what they found is that childhood obesity was on the ascent, on a dramatic and unfortunate ascent. And what they did was they took Tony the Tiger off. They took the Cheetos Cheetah off. They labeled products that said they're high in sodium. They labeled products that said they're high in fat, they're high in sugar. They got Pepsi and Coke to reduce the sugar formulas of their drinks so that they could combat this childhood obesity. You know, in this country here, we have cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes is so rampant that it's costing our economy $700 billion a year. And a lot of us, unfortunately, eat that stuff because we're in a hurry. We need to change our food systems. Children need to understand that a tomato can taste good, that broccoli, that vegetables and grains and beans are good. And we know that it's the American system that's doing that. If you take a look at studies between Latino children coming from Central America or from Mexico and compare their weights to American children here as first-generation immigrants, they're much, much heavier. So those are issues that I think are important, that would actually, we would be better off in our healthcare system as well. We'd be healthier as human beings. We might even be a little happier. I know that's a little off topic from exactly what you want to deal with in Lompoc, but my point is that there's 4,500 bills that are going to be introduced in a 2-year session of the legislature. How many of them can I answer for you? Not very many of them, right? So what you need are navigation points. You need to understand how I'm going to weigh a conservation issue, an environmental issue, a farming issue, a healthcare issue, a business issue, a regulations issue, housing issues. And that's what I'm trying to do tonight, is basically to give you those guide points, those navigation points, so that when you go to the ballot box and you want to look between our incumbent and myself, you have some understanding.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Now it's time to give him some applause, okay? Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break, and you're going to finish your questions, and the committee will be up here to take them from you, and then we'll ask as many questions as we can from the audience. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a lot of good questions here, and you know what? This might be the first time we get through them all, right? Before we have to leave. We might actually ask all these questions. It really just depends upon how long it takes him to answer the questions. Okay. Okay, first question, Mr. Ostrander.
Okay.
California has a spectacular state park system, but it has been faced with underfunding and rising fees. How would you support the California state parks to make them more accessible to all?
That's a very challenging question. How many of you know how the budget works? Well, let me just give you some overview on some of that and why that's such a complicated question to answer. One of the things that we need to make sure is that agencies are cooperating together. So air quality control, for example, up in the area of the Oceano sand dunes, right? We have issues there. Osaflaco Lake. Osaflaco Lake is the most heavily polluted body of DDT water in the state of California. How many of you are aware of that? We have some issues like that that have crossover. The crossover between agriculture, crossover between air quality control, et cetera, et cetera. There needs to be more coordination between those agencies. In the state government, we have a very large budget, like $140 billion. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, about 95% of that budget is already dedicated, meaning that it requires an act of legislature in order to change those payments or who gets paid or what gets paid or funded. So we only have about 5% of the budget, which is what we would call discretionary. And unfortunately, one of the things that I think takes a strong priority that we haven't done a very good job with was education. We are now 48th in the country on education spending. It doesn't mean that we should just throw money at things, but we're falling backwards. We're going backwards. And education is one of those areas where we need to spend more money, especially in our university system. I've got a sheet here where it was just given to me by somebody the other day. His loan amount is $35,000. The interest rate is 12.875%, which is 10 times the amount that we're charging big banks to borrow money, right? So we're charging our students, who are our future, 10 times what we're charging banks to make profit. His total finance charges are $52,170, meaning his total repayment is $87,000 on a $35,000 loan, and it will take him close to 15 years to pay that back. Now, we had a commitment to education under Governor Edmund Brown, and he said that we would make post-secondary education affordable and accessible to all, and we've reneged on that. It's 7 times more expensive to go to school today, and that's a poor investment and a poor ethical choice as well.
Okay. Next question. What is the cost of your campaign, and are there better ways to fund campaigns?
Who wrote that question? I want to hug you.
I don't know.
I'll hug you all. This is an issue that is extremely close to my heart for those of you who know anything about me or my history or what I've worked on. I have a nonprofit called the Citizens Congress. It's a 527 by IRS classification, which means it's a political organization. Our 527 goes out and teaches people about the pernicious effects of money in politics, and I want to give you an example. First of all, in the state of California, we allow corporations who have no morality, no ability to vote, live forever, whose sole function is to make profit, we allow them to donate directly to campaigns. Are you aware of that? Now, the most that you can give to a campaign in an election cycle as a state representative is $8,800. How many of you can write a check for $8,800? Not so many of us, right? So let's look at it personally between the empty chairperson and myself. His average campaign contribution is $2,300. 91.5% of it is funded by corporations and political action committees. And I'm talking about fossil fuel companies, Exxon, Chevron. I'm talking about cigarette companies, Philip Morris Cigarettes, Monsanto, agricultural chemical companies, insurance companies that don't want to see us have health care for all. These are the players that are funding 9 out of the 10 commercials that you're seeing on TV, 9 out of the 10 ranch signs that you're seeing along the road. Now, I had a conversation with Mr. Cunningham yesterday, as I told you, in the interview with the Tribune. And he claimed to me, as every politician has ever said to me, it's never affected my vote. Never affected my vote. Let's take him just for his face value for a second. I'm going to go longer on this question just so that you know, because this is very important. This is very important. Let's just assume for a moment, we have a thing called Measure G. I told you about that, about an attempt to stop 481 new oil wells in our county. And remember I told you that he's taken money from ExxonMobil and Chevron and the Koch brothers, right? These are the monies that have come to this gentleman. He won't take a position on Measure G, which is about drilling new oil wells. He is opposed to the gas tax. Now let's just say that he just genuinely and sincerely believes that fossil fuels are good. Do you believe him? No, we don't. And the Supreme Court decided in a very important landmark case called Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976. I'm sure you all remember it. And what they said there was that the appearance of corruption is equal to corruption itself. What does that mean? That means that if he was sincere on his position on fossil fuels, and quite honestly, I don't believe him, but if he were sincere on that, the appearance of corruption is going to create doubt and a lack of faith in 100,000 people who will vote affirmatively for Measure G. That also means that because he's willing to take money from all those fossil fuel companies and all those corporations, of which I have taken none, he has 6 times more money than I do. So that means that he's going to be able to put his message on ranch signs and commercials and television commercials, radio commercials, to try to convince you that he's the right guy. And because the rest of us have become so apathetic to this process and so annoyed with the constant need for money, that we step further and further and further back from the democratic process. And so we, as candidates, have to chase you more and more and more, like a horse loose in a pasture. And what does that horse do? It just runs. As a result of that, we have a 44% average of people who vote in elections in the United States today. Is that pathetic? And that's one of the reasons. Because we give corporations who don't even live in this district, that have no interest in whether or not you guys fund your schools here. They only want to make sure, in the case of Philip Morris, that cigarette use for youth is going up, and they want to keep it that way. They don't want California to write a bill that requires vaping and puts it in the same category as general smoking. So they try to stop it here. And they try to find somebody who they can fund who will carry that message and carry their economic model. And that's the same with Monsanto and GMO labeling. And that's the same with on fossil fuels. So when this person says, I'm voting against that, I don't believe him, first of all, but secondly, he undermines our faith in our government. I'm spent so far about $100,000, which is hard-won from people like you sending me $20, $25, $250. I have gotten a couple of full donations from supporters of mine that I've known for about 10 years, 8 years. Other than that, I have refused to take money from the NRA, not that they've offered it, and I wouldn't take money from corporations that I believe are not socially responsible. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about that.
Okay. Which of the issues facing us is the most, which of the issues is the most time sensitive? In other words, if or when you are elected, what is your first action item to address?
I think I just mentioned it. And why do I think that's the most important? So many of you don't have a personal connection to money and politics. You don't sense that. It's not quite the same as you having to show up at a doctor and you can't pay for it. I get that. But one of the reasons you don't have health care for all is money and politics. One of the reasons that we're still battling fossil fuels, money and politics. One of the reasons that we have a food system that makes us sick instead of healthy is money and politics. One of the things that gives us such a problem with just trying to regulate or find the means of reducing gun violence is money and politics. After Sandy Hook, 94% of Americans said there should be additional background checks. Why didn't that pass? We told our representatives what we wanted. But why didn't they pass that? Because they were afraid of the NRA, who could mount a massive campaign. And remember those two people in I believe it was Wyoming where they had the shooting in the theater?
Colorado.
Colorado, sorry, thank you, Colorado. Do you know that those 2 state representatives were recalled by the NRA and they're not in office anymore? So for me, making sure that a person who's going to Sacramento is elected because the majority of you decided to help that person is such an important thing. So I would write a bill for publicly funded elections to make sure that my gratitude is not for Facebook, which gave Mr. Cunningham $8,800 for some unknown reason. Not for Monsanto. Not for these companies, which I call sort of the evil players for us. My responsibility would be to make sure that 50.1% of you chose that person that goes, not the person that the corporations choose and that we have to accept. Does that make sense? So, there's plenty of other options and plenty of other things, and most likely I will not get that bill passed immediately. Why? Because the ones that are in power, they get checks written to them. They don't have to knock on your door the way I do. Have any of you seen Jordan down here knocking on doors? No, but I'm doing that. And you know, when I did the candidate training in Sacramento in June, after the primary, they brought Democratic candidates up for a little training session. We spent the whole entire day going through books and telling us the things that they wanted us to do. And then, at the end of the day, we were supposed to go across the street to a little rotisserie or bar or something like that. And there were all these suits in there. I thought, I didn't see any of these people at this training stuff today. I wonder who they are. Who can guess who those people in suits were? Lobbyists. They're just waiting for us. They're just waiting for us. They're just waiting for us to say, hey, I'm going to help you. That's the danger that we're in our democracy today, folks. Majoritarian democracy is not working. We have an epic battle in front of us right now that you're seeing played out all over the country between people like me who have spent a year of my life for free out trying to campaign to change something because it's wrong. Because our democracy has been hijacked by the wealthiest among us. Do you know that only 1.3% of eligible voters gave money to a campaign in 2016? 1.3%. But out of that number, 0.06% of all eligible voters gave 60% of the money that went into the campaigns. What we have is the same thing that you're getting at Disneyland now, where there's 2 lines. You pay extra money, you get to the front. If you're like the rest of us that chose to be teachers and salespeople and university and Union of Domestic Worker people, doing household help, you get the back of the line. Is that right? Is that what we signed up for? Is that in our Constitution, which guarantees all of us the right to pursue happiness? To make ourselves our highest and best use? Not for me. That's why I'm standing up, and that's why I hope you will all stand up this election as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we're going to switch to education. What is your plan to help our failing schools, which have the lowest report card in the county? What about career technical pathways for all schools to prepare our future workforce? And then the second part, describe your guiding principles related to public education.
Guiding principles. None of you will see my grades in school, will you?
Probably not.
I think that we have narrowed, unfortunately, and I know there's an educator back here, we have narrowed the way that we teach our students today in a way that does not accentuate people's individual talents, aspirations, or what we might call their highest and best use. I'll give you an example of my son Bruno. My son Bruno is 21. He was born 3 months premature. When he sat down in preschool, when he went to learn how to read, he was in the Montessori schools, but of course they try to teach you and things, and he did all the hand-eye coordination things, which are so important for young children. But then when it came to actually reading, because his brain was not fully baked when he was born, he did not have some of those synapses in his brain that we all take for granted. So when he looked at a page, the words were still moving. It used to make him nauseous. So he hated to read. Now, my son's no dummy. He tested in the gifted range. But he hates academics because he hates to read, because his initial experiences with reading made him nauseous. And for most of us, when we get sick after doing something, that's kind of a big no-no, don't want to do that. In high school, he was barely getting by. And then he met a vocational education teacher named Jeffrey Lemkuhl, who runs the auto shop in San Luis Obispo High School. And he happens to be an excellent educator who inspires and motivates students. I suddenly saw my son coming home with an auto shop book and looking through it and paging through it. Oh my God. And then he got involved in the Skills USA competition. And he was awarded 5th in the state in a skills competition around automobiles. And today, he has he's the second level mechanic at Sunbelt Tool Rentals and a head of household job. He is earning a good wage with overtime pay, medical, dental, and vision insurance, and a 401k and vacation time. His highest and best use was not studying stuff and just memorizing it. Mine wasn't either. I didn't do well in formalized education. For me, I'm an autodidact. I learned on my own. And for many of us, vocational education is an opportunity to put that intelligence to use in a different way than most of our school systems allow. So yes, we need to fund schools better so that the students that are excellent and excel in academics, like Lucas, who was working for me until last week and is now up in University of California at Davis. But we also need to fund those vocational education programs. And who would agree with me that we also need art? In my opinion, we've made an enormous mistake in cutting out these programs and thinking they're superfluous. Art is an incredibly helpful tool. And you know, the United States was actually founded on a liberal arts education. It wasn't founded on STEM scores. So yes, I think that we need to do more funding there. I think we need to fund preschool for all, universal preschool. I think we need to have art and vocational classes. And can I go on for one more second about that?
One more second.
One more second. One of my other nonprofits is called the Citizens Congress Education Foundation. And what I do is I go around to high schools trying to promote community service in our high schools. In Santa Barbara County, you have Santa Barbara High School over there that has a community service program. And those students are required to do 60 hours of education before they graduate. How many people know that they actually do 186 hours on average? This is not forced philanthropy, as some of my conservative friends like to say. These are students that are exploring and learning compassion and empathy and understanding how our communities work and trying to find a way where they can help out in the areas where our governance or where individuals are falling short. I think it's incredibly important. If we ever get to the place where we can make education accessible and affordable, I would like to see students do 500 hours of community service, and then let's help them through school. What do you say?
Okay, thank you. Last week at the League Forum in Santa Maria, your opponent said he was against taxes. What is your position on Proposition 6, which will remove the gas tax, which is already being used on roads like Highway 1?
Well, let's first start off with saying nobody likes to pay for taxes. I mean, we get that. But the thing that annoys me is that taxes are not regarded as patriotic. How many people go to a restaurant and eat and think it's annoying that you have to pay the bill? But that's what we do. We use the roads, we use the schools, we have the police come by our house, the fire department comes and puts out a fire, we've got agencies that regulate our food and make sure that there's not monopolies. And then somehow we're resentful that we got to pay for that? That's something that we have to work on, trying to make that recognize that taxes are patriotic, first of all. How many of you know, by the way, that the highest taxes, remember, who knows the highest tax rate we've had in the United States? In the 1950s, under Republican administration, guess what the top tier tax rate was? 91% for somebody that was earning over $3 million. That's what we call the progressive tax situation. And what we did with our money back then was we took that money, instead of creating these enormous parachutes for executives who are now earning 300 times what their workers are in their companies, 300 times, we used to put that money back in R&D and in development. Today, we make these very handsome, packages for executives who actually can't prove their worth in most cases. And then we create shareholder benefits, et cetera, et cetera. But I get off the subject. So going back to Proposition 6. I don't want to pay any more tax than anybody else. I want to spend selfishly on me. But we know that infrastructure is in need. We know that we haven't had a tax increase since 1994. We know that there's 5,000 jobs, or 5,000 projects, I should say, that the state has identified and is actually working on today. We know that if we repeal that, those jobs stop. There is no more funding for them. There's about another $1 billion that will come in before January 1st when that new law takes effect. But after that, we're done. Okay? And the fact of the matter is that in this district, let's make it personal, in this district, it will bring in about $1 billion over the next 10 years. And in San Luis Obispo County, one of our largest employers is Greg Papich Construction, who does roads and highways and bridges and et cetera, all over the state and especially in our county. It doesn't cost us a lot. It provides us an enormous amount of safety for our vehicles. It increases efficiency in our roads, like we have bottlenecks on the 101. It increases efficiency. It's absolutely necessary, and the remark that they have money elsewhere in the budget and we've taken from it before is simply not true. We are constitutionally required, for the most part with some small exceptions, to use the money that we raise from gas taxes specifically for roads. But in 2011, when the economy was tanked and this boom and bust cycle that we have, we borrowed money that was put out by the taxes from gas, but we are required to pay it back. So don't let them give you this nonsense that we're just using general funds and we magically have more money someplace. It isn't true.
Okay, thank you. What are you doing for Lompoc and the homeless people? We need money. Is there anything you can do?
You ask me that question one more time. I had a funny answer, but I don't want to give you that.
What are you doing for Lompoc homeless people? We need money. What can you do?
Well, we have, in San Luis Obispo, I'm sorry I have to refer to that sometimes, but I'm more knowledgeable about some of the projects we do there. I hope you'll understand that. But we have a homeless issue, and I was just talking about it to the gentleman from the TV station a minute ago. And one of the things that we found was that homeless people were actually costing the county taxpayer about $17,000 a year to be homeless. Why is that? Because they'd be called out by the police would pick them up, we'd put them in jail, they'd be housed in jails, then we'd put them back into the court systems, then we'd release them, they go back outside. Many of them have opioid addictions, or many of them have other types of self-medication problems, some of them have mental illness, and they weren't getting treated. We somehow magically thought that if we punish them enough, they'll pull right. Well, unfortunately, we know that the reason they're there to begin with is they have trouble, they had a problem. And so we changed how we thought about it. And it's not just San Luis Obispo, this is being done all over the place, right? Where we're recognizing that if we put people in permanent housing to begin with, and then address their addiction issues, and then be able to deal with mental health issues, and then help them with employment and training if necessary. Give these people a chance to take a shower. How many of you would employ a homeless person if they show up in front of you with matted hair and smelling badly? Very few of us. So we have this idea, this patriarchal idea, that we must punish them until they get it right. The point is that most of them had a problem getting it right, or they wouldn't be there to begin with. Most people do not want to be homeless. So we have to look at this problem with a way of creating active, participating citizens again. And sometimes that means giving them a leg up, because at the end of the day, it's actually cheaper for us to put them in permanent housing than it is to keep putting them in jails and police cars and jails and police cars and court systems, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to look at it that way.
Okay. Next question. Have you been working on any legislation that you'd like to introduce if and when you are elected? And apart from agriculture, what interests you in the California government?
Well, first of all, the first issue that I talked about to begin with has to do with money in politics, right? I've already written a bill for the city of San Luis Obispo called Integrity in Our Elections. And what that bill is it creates what we call a democracy voucher. Now, Seattle has just, in 2015, passed a measure exactly like, well, not exactly, but very, very similar to this bill. The state of South Dakota also passed a measure, and the Republican legislator got so nervous they put their legislator into an emergency session to stop it from being employed. And here's how it works. Right now, and I'm just going to give you an example of the city of San Luis Obispo because I have those figures available to me. But I should tell you also maybe the overall costs of elections. To run for office in the city of San Luis Obispo costs about $15,000. We have a $300 cap on limits that if it were tested before the Supreme Court would be thrown out as unconstitutional. The average number of people that create the funding that a city council candidate needs for run an election is 53. That's the average number of people out of 29,000 voters. And strangely enough, about the same 30 or 40 families were financing all the candidates. Not so good, right? Let's go to the state level, or actually in the county level. I'm not sure about Santa Barbara County, but in San Luis Obispo County, we have no limits on contributions to somebody who wants to run for for the district supervisor. That's scary. Then we have at the state level, we have a maximum contribution of $8,800, and the average cost of an assembly race is about $500,000. Now, this is money that has to be raised every 2 years, folks. Every 2 years. That's why they're constantly on campaigning. Now let's go to Congress. The average cost of a congressional campaign is $1.6 million. You got to raise that every 2 years. In this district, Mr. Carbajal and Mr. Farid spent $3.2 and $2.8 million themselves. Only 2% of Mr. Farid's money came from small donations, and 69% came from out of the area. Shall we go on? A senator, $11.5 million. And in 2008, Barack Obama decided not to use the public financing system that we have available to our presidential candidates because it was too small. The amount of money that's available is $49 million to the primary and $99 million to the general election. It's $150 million approximately, right? Sounds like a lot of money. How much did they spend? Mitt Romney and Barack Obama spent $1.1 and $1.2 billion for their elections. Okay. We need to change the dynamic because, as I told you earlier, only 1.3% of the population is actually even giving money to politicians. So it goes to the wealthiest who have disposable wealth. So what we need to do is change the sense of gratitude to all of you, right? That's what we talked about earlier, about making sure that if Janet is the wealthiest person here, that my obligation to my campaign is not simply to focus on Janet, but to talk to all of you and to make sure that 51% of you want to support the ideas that I'm putting forth. The only way you can do that is to take the individual out of it. Do you see a conflict of interest when we're asking a public representative to seek private financing? There is an inherent conflict there. So if we fund it publicly, then the onus on the candidate is to get most of you to feel that they have the right ideas. And the democracy voucher system works like this. You would each get basically a debit card. In Seattle, they use a piece of paper as a voucher. And it is the obligation of the candidate to go around and talk to as many of you as it possibly can to convince you that you should support that person. And then with that democracy voucher, you would give some or all of it to that candidate, and that is how the candidate funds their campaigns. It's based on their popularity and on the ideas they're putting forth. Now, we do that basically once a candidate gets to office. Our taxes pay for that person. And we use our taxes to pay for our clerks so that there's no shenanigans when it comes to counting the votes. So having a publicly funded election is absolutely paramount to getting rid of the corporate influence because most of us do not have $8,800 to give to an election. Most of us, even if we give money, our average contributions are about $100. And that tends to be from people who are retired and the older ones. I think it's interesting if you look around this crowd right now. Take a look around how many middle class and middle-aged people do we see here? I mean, I know all of you are under 45. I know that. So I'm really looking at, But when you look, in every event that I go to, the people that give us money are the people who've retired, who can afford it. Only 6% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted in the primary. 6%. We can change that. It means that we put the onus on the candidate to promote good ideas, not simply be good fundraisers. Is there a second half to that? I'm sorry, I went on a bit.
I don't know, but I've forgotten if there was, right? Okay, you're going to like this one. In your opinion, what are the biggest differences and issues between the two candidates?
Sincerity, honesty. You want that produced in a bill? Let me give you some examples. My opponent, strangely, voted against the bill that would prohibit the advertising of conversion therapy. We all know what conversion therapy is, right? Why would you vote against that? He voted against a bill that would prevent women from being fired from a job because of their reproductive rights decision. He voted against a bill, SB 100, that put California on a path to 100% renewable energy by 2045. Why? He voted against SB 3, which will soon be a proposition to you, creating that $4 billion bond measure that creates money for affordable housing. Why? I don't understand that. He has done some good things that I agree with. I don't want to sit here and try to disparage him altogether. We both agree that there needs to be more money spent on vocational education, although he has not shown a propensity to see that education money, delivered. There is a couple of other bills that I think were telling, because I was asked to run for this office 3 times. This is not fun. I don't mean to be, looking for applause on that. I'm just telling you, it's not fun to walk into a room and have everybody say what they think about you out loud. It's not fun to have people send you emails telling you what a horrible person you are. And I get that all the time. I got one today, right? I've had a person come up to me at a car and yell at me because I was a communist and a Nazi and a socialist and a horrible blah, 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 just screaming at me like you'd see on a viral video in my district. But one of the things that really bothered me is there was a bill that came up that said that children who were given a life sentence for a terrible crime should have the opportunity for parole after 25 years. He said no. I think that's horrible. Why would you throw a life away? That young person's brain wasn't fully formed, and yes, they may have done something terrible, but most likely, I'm going to bet that their household wasn't so good which they came from. So I don't understand that. I don't understand why somebody thinks that government is there to put us down and not to help us up. He voted against a bill that would allow you to have sued Wells Fargo in court rather than going to arbitration because they were concocting all these phony accounts and bilking you for money. In every corporate contract you have today, you're forced to go to arbitration. Why? Because it's to their advantage, and we don't have options. He voted against the bill that would allow you to sue them in open court. Why? Is that what we want? It's not what I want. He's voted against health care. He thinks that's, the DMV can't be run properly, so therefore we shouldn't have health care. Medicare works, folks. It really does. So from my point of view, he's against SB 1. He's against the oil, preventing oil wells. When we look at the major issues of helping people, giving them a chance to get up, and in the environment, which are all things that are very important to us, I'm sorry, folks, he is not with us. He is not with us in the majority, and I'm not making that up just because of people in this room. 62% of Californians have said they want health care for all. How about this one? He opposes the sanctuary status, so he wants our police and our police system to cooperate with ICE. How about this one? We've all decided that marijuana, whether medical or for recreation, should be allowed. He says the feds should be, we should cooperate with the feds to prosecute people that use marijuana. Now, I don't care what your particular take on it, but that's the law. That's what we decided as a group. So how dare he go up there and say, no, I personally have a vendetta or whatever against people that use, medical marijuana, and I want to cooperate and I want to prosecute those people, despite what we say as constituents. Have I made it clear? A contrast there? Is there any other questions or issues that you'd like to ask our difference on? Money in politics. He's taken money from all the fossil fuel companies. He's taken money, 91.5%, as I said, from corporations, political action committees. I've taken none. That alone should disqualify him for office.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this is an easy question. Is hydroponic farming good for the environment?
Hydroponic farming is not what I would call holistic farming, but it is a necessary form of farming in some cases because we have food deserts in this country, right? You go to inner city places where they don't have property, where they don't have the opportunity to get good, clean vegetables, and hydroponic farming is a place where they can produce a lot of produce and get that produce to people who need it. So I totally support hydroponic farming. I'm not sure that it's necessary here in Lompoc. But if you lived in the Bronx, if you lived in Watts, if you lived in, near Soldier Field in Chicago, hydroponic farming might be an opportunity for you to give your child something that's nutritious, something that helps them form a good brain, something that helps them develop without problems, and something they might not be able to get in their corner liquor store or some other store because Vons or Safeway or whatever the Ralphs are, whatever those are, choose not to put a store in their neighborhood. So I think it has a real value.
Okay, great. Okay, we see lots of Cunningham signs, but not much of our assemblymen. How will you represent those of us in Lompoc as part of the 35th district?
Well, as I said earlier, because I've made a lot of friends here from doing this, and I think that it's important. I think that's my obligation as a person who is to represent the people in this district. That means you got to make the trips to Cambria and to Sisquoc and to Lompoc and to Santa Maria, et cetera, et cetera. It's just effort, folks. I don't have small kids at home anymore like Mr. Cunningham does. I get that he might want to parse his time because he's gone 8 months of the year practically away from his small children. He's got 4 small children. Maybe you should think of a different career choice if it's going to be away from your kids that long. It's not a choice that I would make necessarily. So from my point of view, this is the job. All I can tell you is I'll be here.
Okay. Here's a question about sanctuary status in sanctuary cities. Sanctuary status in California, not in all cities, but some cities, is it for everyone, illegal aliens, and overextending, people that overextend their visas?
Can you ask me that again?
Yeah, I'll see if I can. Okay. Sanctuary status in California, and all of California or just some cities? For anyone, illegal aliens, and also tourists overextending their visas. Those are all question marks.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that one, to be honest with you, but I'll try.
Okay. Go ahead, try.
Much has been made in the news these days by some dramatic criminal events where illegal immigrants were involved. But I think that it is worth noting that this is basically compelled or propelled by somebody who I won't name, who I believe is racist. And if we were to base these legislative decisions on data rather than an emotional want, I'm pretty sure a lot of white men in North Carolina would not own guns or would not be able to travel. Because when you look at the most horrific crimes we've had, there's been a large share of them come from North Carolina. So if we're really looking at data, let's operate out of data rather than out of fear. I don't believe in the process of operating out of fear, although it is what compels many of us.
Okay. Only 2 more questions. How about
That's
that?
good. Bring 'em on.
Okay, here they are. What would you like to see done in Lompoc that you feel is being ignored?
Well, I have to ask you that. And is it something that the state level office can deal with, or is it a local or county issue? One of the problems I have sometimes in addressing some of these issues is that we have a variety of different legislative bodies that are meant to address issues. And yes, there needs to be cross-coordination. Sometimes the role that the state plays is a funding mechanism, because the resources in a rural community or semi-rural community like Lompoc aren't great enough sometimes to deal with large infrastructure projects, or to deal with projects where you have a lot of homeless people and you need funding for a homeless shelter, or something that has to do with schools, or something like that. So it's challenging for me to give you an answer for that without having a specific issue, and without recognizing and having a conversation around whether or not that's best approach from a local level, or best approach from a county level, or from a state level, or even federal level. And there is crossover in some of those things. Redevelopment agencies, for example. They came in from the state level. They were typically used in large cities to address blighted areas. And what they did was it allowed states to keep more of their money, or the local areas to keep more of their money for schools and things like that, and have them give more input into what that design looked. But the reverse can be true too. Sometimes state legislation actually impedes progress in local decision making. So it's too difficult for me to answer that question without having more feedback from all of you.
Okay, and you'll probably get that. Okay. So I think you'll like this one too. What are your greatest needs between now and November 6th?
My greatest needs. Massage. Oh, about the campaign. Oh, yeah.
Right.
I need you. I have one thing that is going to help me beat money in politics, and that's your vote. And that's you being willing to get up, as so many of you here do. I already know. We have a meet and greet at Jim's house on Saturday. Al Thompson. Sorry. He's a good friend of mine, obviously. At Al Thompson's house on Saturday, we're having a meet and greet at between 2 to 4 if you'd like to come out for that. We're going to be walking on Saturday here in in Lompoc, that Lorraine Waldo has set up for us, and Janet Blevins. So we could use your help in doing walking. If you can make a contribution, it helps. Every one of those ranch signs that we put up cost me about $93 a piece. Every one of the yard signs that you take are about $8 a piece. So if you can take a yard sign tonight in the state of Alabama, in the race between Judge Roy Moore and Doug Jones, one of the reasons that people cited for choosing to go outside of their historical vote and voting for somebody on the blue team was that they took faith and confidence that other neighbors of theirs also chose to support that person. Because believe it or not, our attachment to our tribe is greater than our attachment to fact. Would you guys agree with me on that? We all do it. Our attachment to our tribe. And so making sure that you put out a yard sign, and that you're talking to your friends, and that you give a donation if you can, and that I love it that people are wearing these shirts tonight. People go out and they see that, and they see that you're supporting that. That creates momentum, people. He's not coming down here, but he has just littered the area with his signs. And when we go knocking on doors, 9 out of 10 times they don't know about my campaign. That's not necessarily because we're doing a bad job. More than commonly, it is because people are apathetic to this process. So your enthusiasm is helpful. Doing forums like this is helpful. Knocking on doors is helpful. Will you do a phone bank? You can make some calls from your own home if you're willing to do that. Elva calls some of the Latino friends that we have in the area. You can make a donation, you can put up a yard sign, you can do all of those things. And tell a friend, wear a shirt, give me a massage. All of those things would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Oh, one last thing. Social media. Are any of you on social media? Have any of you liked my page? You know, that is one way that's really, really helpful because I put lots of stuff on there. Margaret Barker over here does our social media. She does a terrific job at it. And her job is to try to put something on the pages every single day. Like she's putting, I think you're doing a live feed on Facebook right now. But if you like the page, then that spreads. And then when I send something out, it might go out to other people. Because that's how we can win this, people. The grassroots thing is that we got to make our voices heard, and we can do that without having to spend money on commercials. You know, television commercials are the least efficient means of campaigning. The least efficient. You only do that when you have a plethora of money and you can throw money at it. The most effective campaigns are knocking on doors and talking to people. That's what you can do if you want to win this.
Okay, guess what? It's
Yes.
time for your closing statement.
Are you not tired of hearing me pontificate at this point?
But go ahead, go ahead.
I don't have any prepared remarks for you. I think I've stated my case as best that I can. I've tried to explain to you where I stand on issues as navigation points so that when issues come up in the future, you can be assured or at least have a good, strong idea of which way I'll go on something. And that's really what you need to understand and what you need to have. So I'm disappointed that my opponent hasn't shown up today. I think that's indicative. It's indicative either of somebody who's done a calculation as a politician. Don't ever call me a politician, by the way. I hate that term. He's either done the calculation as a politician or he doesn't care about you. You can decide which one of those things they are. I'm here. I'm here, and I will continue to come down here. And I continue to believe that the most important messages that we as the blue team need to talk about are education, environment, and equality. Whether that's equality in the healthcare market, whether that's equality with wages, whether that's equality between genders. In the environment, whether that means Cat Canyon, whether it means Rio Grande oil fields, whether it means stomach cancer, in our agricultural workforce. And education, so that people can reach their highest and best use. You know, we're 19th in the world today on upward social mobility. In the past, upward social mobility was the hallmark of America. The Horatio Alger story, right? Even though that's kind of a myth. The Horatio Alger story. But today, from my point of view, the legislative interest and the people who are tending to make our decisions for us are the people who've landed and they're now pulling the ladder up behind them. And they're saying, I don't want you to have a chance. I got mine, screw you. In fact, one of the young men who went to Nipomo High School who I met, who lives in Santa Maria, named Keanu Lede, he had good enough grades that he could get into one of those schools that only had an 8% acceptance rate, but he could not afford $87,000 in loans because his family was poor. He grew up in tents and parks sometimes because his mom didn't have a job. That young man needs to be supported. He would bring his entire family up instead of keeping generations down. And that's what we need to change. Our government must aspire. And what I mean by aspire, think about whether that was creating the world's first democracy, whether that was creating manifest destiny, horrible as it was for our native peoples, but it was an aspiration. It was an American dream. Whether it was Lincoln creating the land-grant institutions that we now have all over the United States, giving education to farmers, which was 90% of our population at that time. Whether it was World War I and World War II, where we decided that we had to help compassionately to prevent the takeover of democracy and to spread democracy and show people that this is the best way to live. Whether it was creating the vaccines that allowed Americans to grow from the age of, to change how their mortality rate from 48, which it was in about 1900, to almost 80 years of age today. That was a public program. And then we had the highway system in the 50s. What an incredible task. How many conservatives today would say, we can't afford it, it's too expensive. And then we had the space race, and John F. Kennedy said, we're going to do this not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Collectively, we aspired. And we did that with our education system in California, and then we let it go. And then money got so entrenched in politics, and it seemed like everything else trickled down. And today, what I want you to ask yourself How is our government aspiring? Where is our collective dream? How are we as a people moving forward on to the next level? We are entirely dependent, if you ask me, on Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. And we don't want to pay for the things we have now because we're comfortable. We need to aspire, folks. We need to help one another. We need to make sure that generations who did not have the same luxury as those people who are now pulling up the ladder have an opportunity to improve their own lives. And there's lots of room for growth. Lots of room for growth. So those are the things that I believe in. I hope you'll join me on November 6th or before if you're going to vote by mail. I hope you'll walk. I hope you'll phone call. I hope you'll give a donation. I hope you take a yard sign. I hope you'll put us on your social media. And I want to say thank you for giving me this forum tonight to be able to share these ideas.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very, very much. And thank you to the audience. You were wonderful. Now, I want to let you know, just before you go, that we have 2 more forums. Can you believe that? We have 4 forums altogether. We're down 2 now. So the 3rd one will be next Monday night at 6 o'clock, and it's the Allen Hancock and the Lompoc Unified School District bond measures. And then on Wednesday, October 3rd, we'll have the school district candidates here. So please come back. I know you're probably kind of tired of coming out all the time, but you know what? We have to do it. Right, we have to do it. We have to support our candidates, and then we have to vote. So thank you all for coming. You're a great, great audience. Thank you.